Welcome back to another episode of the About Mansfield Consumer Advice Series. I'm your host, Steve Cosio, and to my right, as always, that would be to your left, Dr. Joseph Adams. He's with Calibration, Chiropractic, and Functional Health right here in Mansfield, Texas, and we are continuing our series on concussions. First of all, Dr. Joe, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
And in the last episode was basically concussion 101. What is it? Who gets them? How are they treated? How are they diagnosed? And expanding on that, we're now getting into more specifics. Do people get over concussions without professional help?
Yes, and so that's one of the more interesting things about concussion. Because, 90% of people, depending on the stats you look at, maybe 70% of people will get over a concussion, an acute concussion. But what about the ones that don't, right? That, 10 to 30% of people that don't, and what do they do? And those are the people that practitioners like myself really serve. Because once that, headache doesn't go away, once that dizziness doesn't get better, once that fatigue or brain fog doesn't go away, then a lot of people are left with, little hope and a lot of questions and where do you go? And so those are the people that we really serve. And a lot of times there's something going on with them maybe that, they didn't know about, and then maybe that's why they're not getting better.
So it's the long-term issues that you're focusing on. And again, going back to the diagnosis where they come into your office, you run them through a battery of tests, and when you mentioned that the majority of people can get over them by themselves. How do I know I've got a concussion?
Yeah, so you would most likely be able to piece it together if you still have the initial signs and symptoms that you had from the event that caused the concussion. After about 2 weeks, if those haven't gone away, then now you're, maybe don't have a concussion anymore. You have what's called post-concussion syndrome, which means that it's just continued on into a syndrome of problems for that person.
All right. And you've mentioned from 48 hours up to as long as 2 weeks that someone can suffer from a concussion. What is the difference then between, say, the 1 to 2 week sufferer versus those that have longer symptoms? Why are people suffering longer issues from a concussion?
Yeah, so one of the first things you kind of got to think about, and this applies to all of health really, is that, like if somebody gets a concussion, how healthy were they when they got the concussion? Because that's really what can impact their recovery. And so if somebody is less resilient when they get a concussion because maybe they've had one before, that's one thing that can set you up for post-concussion syndrome or not healing from one because you've had one in the past.
Yeah.
Another one is underlying other types of neurologic or health problems. So if somebody would say who has anxiety and depression, like clinically diagnosed anxiety or depression, we know that there are actually functional brain changes in their brain compared to somebody who doesn't have that. And when you get a concussion, they're more likely to suffer from post-concussion syndrome than somebody who doesn't have those mental health problems. Another one would be the aging population. So, if you're older, and you had a mishap and you fell and maybe you hit your head, and you have a concussion, that person may not heal, within the 48 hours to 2 week time frame because their body's not as resilient. So really anything that makes you less resilient when you get a concussion is going to dictate how well you heal. And sometimes it's, having a thyroid problem you didn't know about.
Yeah.
It could be anything like that. So really anything that lowers your overall resilience will set you up to more than likely have issues with concussion moving forward than somebody's healthy.
When I think about concussions, especially on a long-term basis, all right, say you've got someone in the peak of their health. They're between 20 and 40 years old, but they're athletic, but they compete in boxing. Mm-hmm. They compete in MMA, martial arts. Not necessarily extreme martial arts, but martial arts. What are the long-term issues that I've been hit several times by boxing, and now I'm in my 60s and life's getting a little fuzzy.
Yep. Yep, that does happen, and I think that's actually a big part of the story in the NFL, right? And in professional boxing as well. Is a lot of these people that we revered as amazing athletes in these very aggressive physical sports, as they tended to age, we saw a decline in them, and it's because they've been concussed multiple times. I mean, some of these people have had more concussions, than the average person would ever, dream of having over their career. And what that sets you up for is a low grade chronic encephalopathy. So what that really just means is that there is pressure changes in the cerebrospinal fluid in the brain over time. So it's like there's a pressure building up in their head because they've had so many head impacts.
Sure.
And that over time will lead to a cognitive decline in that person. The other thing about long-term concussions is that if you've had multiple concussions, there is research that shows that if you've had multiple, that it will shorten your lifespan. And so it will shave years off of your life. The other one is just slow chronic decline, where you get people who trend more towards dementia or Alzheimer's because they've had multiple concussions. And a newer one that we're starting to see now as well is Parkinson's.
I was going to say Parkinson's because that's what Muhammad Ali passed away from. And those who have been around and boxing fans know the decline of Muhammad Ali over the years. So, which kind of touched on the next question of, does getting a concussion have long-term health consequences? And that it sounds like a yes.
Yeah, it does. And so, it's really important to take a concussion seriously, right? Because if somebody doesn't heal, we need to rehab them. They need rehab to help improve those deficits. Because I've had people come into the office. I can think of one patient who was in a helicopter crash in the military. That was their job, flying helicopters. Helicopter crashed, got a concussion. And, they've had obviously, pain in their body since then, but they also still had concussion symptoms.
Interesting.
And so, after, chatting with them for a little bit about, what's going on with their neck, and find out they got headaches, and then find out, they were in this crash. And I'm like, well, we really need to evaluate you for concussion, right? Even though that was 15 years ago, this looks like maybe that you have post-concussion syndrome, and that's really what's causing a lot of this. And so, sure enough, took a look at this gentleman's eyes, just doing basic testing bedside, and it gets dizzy. Just following my finger, it gets dizzy.
Oh, wow. And
so I say that just to highlight that a lot of times you can get a concussion and you can not even realize that it's still impacting your life on a daily basis because you forgot about it, you moved on, or you pushed through, and you have no idea how this is affecting you negatively. And I just think about that gentleman in particular. If he hadn't come to see me and we hadn't done the full workup on him and then treated him the way we did, he'd still be having these issues, and it's just going to get worse as you age, right?
Oh, sure.
So it's just going to get worse, and so maybe that would have shaved years off his life if it wasn't treated.
Let's go back to the word rehab. Now, when I think rehab, if I've got back a few years ago, I had a frozen shoulder. So the rehab was a lot of stretching, and you've got some other type which may involve stretching or going through muscular rehab. What is the rehab process for a concussion?
It's really cool. And the reason I say that is
it's really cool.
It's really cool.
Keep that in mind. It's really cool.
It's really cool. And the reason it's so cool is because we're actually rehabbing, the nerves, right?
Sure.
So when it comes to the eyes, that's where we do most of the rehab is really in the eyes, because they're so badly affected by a concussion. So what we do is we figure out which eye movements somebody can't do, like if they're not able to fixate on a point, if they're not able to pursue a target or rapidly target different points, then that's what we start working on. So a lot of the rehab for concussion in our clinic is ocular rehab, eye rehab. And so we'll have people sit, we'll put a chart up in front of them, have them move their head, neck, eyes in certain positions, and we retrain the eyes to work for them. And as we do that, headaches go away, dizziness goes away, brain fog goes away, because a lot of those are all just symptoms of damage to the ocular system.
That, my friends, is another 10-minute nugget of information. Dr. Joseph Adams, we're talking concussions and a series, again, of concussions. Last week was the pretty basic 101, if you will. Today, continuing that series, and we will continue the series again, a couple of more episodes. Dr. Joe, if someone wanted to reach out to you, if they've got questions about concussions, how can they find you?
Yeah, so the easiest way would just be go to calibrationmansfield.com, and you can go to our homepage. And on the homepage, like halfway down, is actually a booklet on concussions. And so it can give people, a place to start, and help them, understand what's going on with them. So that would be what I would recommend.
CalibrationMansfield.com. That again, Dr. Joseph Adams. And that is another episode of the About Mansfield Consumer Advice Series. Dr. Joe, we'll see you next week.
All right, see you then.